NASCAR Writer of the Year, Matt Selz. We are talking the Coca-Cola 600. We do have some weather concerns this weekend in Charlotte. It's basically a monsoon right now. But Matt Selz, how's it going? How excited are you for one of the greatest weekends in motorsports?
I am excited. Well, I'm still excited. I'm a little less excited now that there's the threat of moving the Coke 600 potentially to Monday, as we're recording, which is about I don't know, quarter to 5 East Coast time Saturday. It still stands as a Sunday evening race. Forecast does not look very good. They've canceled Cup qualifying and practice. They already moved the Xfinity race to Monday at noon Eastern. So we'll see. I really hope it stays as a triple header because there's no better day than camping out for Monaco at breakfast, Indy 500 at lunch, and then have enough time to grill some stuff up and then go enjoy the Coke 600 at Charlotte.
Yeah, it's usually one of the best days for racing. It's over 1,200 miles of action, and it just goes all day long. Matt does have a betting piece available for the Indy 500 on fantasyalarm.com. It's right on the homepage, so check that out. But let's just talk Charlotte Motor Speedway real quick. This is, a mile and a half intermediate. We were talking before the podcast that this can be comparable to tracks like Vegas and Kansas, although those two mirror each other a little bit better. But we also said, you can pull from Texas Motor Speedway as much as those races suck, as well as Darlington, Homestead. Are there any other tracks that we can look at, or should we just maybe look at how drivers have driven in this package and with this tire combination?
Yeah, I would say mainly we're focusing on this package and tire combination. By now, we've got about a year and a half's worth of data on intermediates. So even though they haven't run all that many tracks this year that comp directly to Charlotte, I mean, they ran Kansas and Vegas, right? But they ran this package at Dover. That's not really a very good comp. Darlington, in my mind, doesn't necessarily comp that well because there's a lot of tire wear at Darlington, and we don't really see that at Charlotte. I would say Michigan, you can toss that in as well. Even though it's a 2 mile, it's a pretty high speed, low tire wear 2 mile compared to Auto Club. So yeah, that's I'm looking a lot at what they've done consistently at Charlotte because this is the home base of NASCAR. So this is probably the most, most of these drivers are very used to this track. From testing or just growing up in the Charlotte area or racing here fairly consistently. And so the guys that have shown consistency over the last several races here, I think that translates pretty well to this package, even though there's been 2 or 3 different iterations of the car in the last 8-10 races here.
So, what difference can we expect in terms of weather? So, right now, we are expecting this race to be run Sunday night. I believe it starts around 7 p.m. Eastern time, and it's a long race, which we'll also get into shortly. How is the track or the racing conditions going to be different if they race Sunday night as opposed to if this gets rescheduled Monday afternoon because there is a lot of rain in the forecast this weekend?
Yeah, so one thing that comes with the rain is generally speaking cooler temps, right? We've all been there where it's hot and we're wishing for a rainstorm because then it's just going to cool off by a decent chunk. Well, the highs on Sunday, I believe, are only supposed to barely break 70, and by the time it gets to the evening, it's going to be a lot cooler than that, obviously, because the sun will have gone down. The front will be moving out, hopefully, at that point. So it could be cool. Could be still a little humid from the residual rain in the air, which, in some respects is better for the field in general to do that Sunday night than to race Monday, probably mid-afternoon, I would assume, right? You got to figure, about 3 hours for the Xfinity race, 2.5 hours for the Xfinity race, given the amount of cautions those guys usually produce. So if it's mid-afternoon, it's going to be warmer, it's going to be drier. Track could be a little slicker at that point. It will have already been rubbered up from the Xfinity race versus Sunday night, where it'll be a clean racetrack at this point because the trucks have already run, but it got all washed off. So I would say that it's certainly better for Fords to run it Sunday night versus Monday. But I think in general, it's probably a more even playing field Sunday evening than Monday.
All right. So if the Daytona 500 is the biggest race of the year for the NASCAR season, the Coca-Cola 600 is the longest race of the year. We are getting 400 laps around a 1.5-mile track, so 600 total miles. The race is divided into 4 stages. It's the only race on the schedule that's divided into 4 stages, with every other race divided into 3. Um, so really, this is kind of a war of attrition. We like to think these intermediates are a little more predictable. The Coke 600 is probably the least predictable just because of its length. Are there any strategies or drivers that you might downgrade a little bit simply because this race is so long?
Yeah, so typically speaking, I don't generally like playing rookies in this race. We've talked about this for a few years now, simply because it's far longer than any race they've ever run in like, to give you an idea, right? The Xfinity race here is one of the longer races on the schedule. It's 200 laps. Like, the Cup race is twice as long. So that's that's a pretty big, like, it's racing twice, right? And keep in mind, Cup cars bigger, heavier, take more to drive them, produce more force, going faster, generally speaking. So rookies, I feel like they may be good for the first half of the race or so, but unfortunately, you can't cash out your DFS ticket halfway through a race, unlike some prop bets out there halfway through a football Sunday, right? So typically speaking, I tend to avoid playing rookies. They're still getting their feet wet in the Cup Series. It's a very long night. They tend to not, do so well. And I wanted to ask you, what are you doing with Alex Bowman this week? Because it's his first race back. I know he's been medically cleared. They're not going to put him in the car if he's not. I saw video of him, standing, walking around at a charity thing. That's all well and good. Putting that much force on your back, seated in a car for that long without any track time previously, having not raced for, what is it now, basically a month,
Yeah.
right? I'm a little concerned that he's going to fade towards the end of the race.
So I'm not playing cash games or double ups this weekend, but I would be okay with him in that format just because he starts so far back. We know the equipment is good. With Blake Harris as his crew chief this year, the car has been phenomenal. He was the points leader in the series before he got hurt.
Right.
I'm still going to put my faith in the car being good because it's a Hendrick Motorsports car. Even when Chase Elliott came back from his injury, he did pretty well. He's been top 12 in the 6 races since in his last 3 races. Go
Right.
ahead.
So I'm not concerned about the performance of the car.
Right. So
I'm more concerned about the fact that it was a
him.
broken back and he'll be sitting in the same, even Chase
I hear
Elliott,
you.
who's been great at Martinsville, got out at Martinsville, a track we don't think of as a heavy load, exhaustive race, got out and was spent.
Yeah.
Granted, he was on the shelf for almost twice as long as Bowman, and he had surgery and Bowman didn't, but I'm still just a little concerned that the back's going to start.
No, that's absolutely warranted. And, so I'm just saying I'm perfectly fine going to him in cash games. I think that this is probably a good spot to maybe be underweight in tournaments, just because like the PD alone is going to draw the attention of so many DFS players. The price tag is very manageable at 8,600. I mean, before he got hurt, he was still in roughly the same price range, even though he probably should have been much higher just because Blake Harris and this team had nailed the setup almost every single week. Didn't have a win, but still had some very good performances. So I would probably take the firm stand of being underweight in tournaments. But I could definitely see playing him in cash games. But for tournaments, if I really want to make a unique lineup in a race that's long and fairly chaotic, despite the fact it's on an intermediate, I'd rather be underweight on him.
Yeah, clearly there with you. Now, I will say, talk about unique lineups. I think there's a lot of opportunities to build unique lineups this week because we didn't get practice in qualifying. We got the metric, which isn't using the All-Star race, obviously, but it is using Darlington, which was a fairly chaotic race. So there's a lot of shuffling there. For example, we got Brad Keselowski starting third. We've got Kevin Harvick starting second. I doubt we would have gotten those guys starting that high for the Coke 600 if we had actually gotten practice and qualifying. Not to say they wouldn't be top 10 contenders. I'm just saying not second and third. We've got guys like Austin Dillon, who I've been pretty high on in my betting pieces this week. The grill versus grill with Ed Rouse. He's starting 33rd this week, which is a little further back than I thought he was going to. We've got Ty Gibbs starting in the top 20, which is interesting. We just talked about Bowman starting pretty far back.
So who do you like more? Would it be between Austin Dillon and Alex Bowman? Because Dillon starts.
I would take Austin Dillon.
I probably would too. I mean, there's a little more PD, but also his performances at this track have been very good, and he's giving you a significant discount as well.
Yeah, I also think that since that Kyle Busch has made a palpable difference in the consistency at RCR. Like, RCR was good with Tyler Reddick last year at certain tracks, right? Now Kyle Busch is there, and these two teammates have run top 5 in a couple different intermediate tracks throughout the year. Not that they necessarily finished there, but at various points of those races, they had speed, green flag speed, to run in the top 5, not just on pit cycles. So, I would probably look. They're starting about the same spot, so I would take the healthier, arguably more consistent here, Austin Dillon, over Alex Bowman in that case. But there was. Are you playing Chase Briscoe over Austin Dillon? Because there was a debate in NASCAR Twitter earlier this week before anybody knew starting spots. Chase Briscoe's now starting 20th and Austin Dillon starting 33rd. So it's a little more interesting based on DFS pricing and what they necessarily would have to do to hit value.
I have very little interest in Chase Briscoe. If he was starting outside the top 25, I could probably get talked into a few shares. But he's starting P20, and we saw him pretty much doing laps around the back at Dover not too long ago. I forget what track was after Dover. Oh, Kansas. He was awful at Kansas. And they ran the intermediate package at those two tracks. He did manage to finish 17th at Darlington, but he was a better play in that race where he started P31. I can't really bring myself to get excited about many of the Fords, especially a guy like Chase Briscoe, who just seems to be missing the setup on a consistent basis when it comes to these intermediate tracks. Now, if it's a shorter flat track or a super speedway, I can get talked into it just because he's performed better on the shorter flat tracks, and super speedways just breed chaos. And if he survives it, then he can make an optimal lineup. You can say that about anybody. But for this package and this type of track, I'm not excited about Chase Briscoe when he's starting 20th.
Yeah, I would agree on that one. I think that's a little.
I'd rather play Daniel Suarez, who's $200 more, but he starts P24
and has arguably shown way more consistency in this car. And
his teammate was one of the dominators at this race a year ago.
He was. There's been a lot of talk about him this week too, and whether or not he can finish a race or somebody's going to pay him back.
Here's the thing with Ross Chastain is that I feel like the discussion of who's going to wreck Ross or someone's got to retaliate against Ross. We've been talking about this for over a year now of Ross Chastain getting what's coming to him, and it's just never happened. I don't think it ever will. I don't think that there's a driver in NASCAR that will step up and intentionally wreck him or try to screw him out of a race. Not saying it'll never happen, but we were waiting for this to happen in the playoffs last year. We were waiting it to happen later in the year. We saw Denny Hamlin admit to doing it earlier this year, and he punched Gragson in the face on pit road a month or so ago. But again, no one is screwing Ross Chastain except Ross Chastain, like how we saw it at Darlington when he and Kyle Larson wrecked for the lead because Chastain was once again too aggressive. I love playing Ross Chastain in DFS because there's always this dark cloud looming over him that he could get wrecked, but we just don't ever see it.
I agree. I also don't think people are going to pay him back in the middle of the season when it doesn't necessarily matter.
Yeah.
right? Like if the payback happens, it's happening in the last round of the playoffs, right? Like Martinsville's become the de facto payback track
Yeah.
as the penultimate race of the season and whatnot. But I look, even Denny Hamlin, who wanted to, who said he wrecked Chastain on purpose, has been buddy with him in post race stuff. Like after the Chastain Gregson, scuffle, Hamlin was there on Chastain's side. So
Yeah.
like I don't want to say it's manufactured at this point, but I think it's become the talking point that, as we are currently talking about, that people know is going to bring eyeballs to the race. Oh, what's Ross going to? I mean, for the love of God, Fox even on one of their commercial breaks in the last race put up the "Thank you Ross" meme as they went to commercial, following a caution. That wasn't even his fault. So
Yeah.
but if we're talking strategy here, I do want to point out that 5 of the last 10 winners here have started on the pole. Well, sorry,
Yeah.
4 of the last 10 have started on the pole. 5 of the last 10 have started inside the top 10, with the 5th being starting 9th. And the rest of them have started 14th or worse. So you can win here starting outside the top 10. But in
And
general,
in that argument, it's not so much like, yeah, the race is long enough where you can move up. It's just the race is long enough where it's just like the best drivers will rise, to the top.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, think about Larson's 600 last year.
It was terrible for the first half.
The first 200 laps were the worst I've ever seen out of one drive, like in terms of penalty. I think he got 3 pit road penalties.
Yeah.
Didn't his car literally catch fire?
Yes. He had to drive through the field like 2 or 3 times. And like
Yeah.
at the halfway point, he like the radio communication between him and his crew chief was just outstanding. Like they admitted, like, look, the first half of the race sucked. It was awful. Everybody was bad. But then they rebounded and they still think they finished like top 12 or top 10. It was just a good performance from a great driver that just turned it around halfway through the race.
Yeah, he finished 9th and wound up leading 51 laps.
It's just a good driver.
Which I think was actually, it was the 3rd most behind Chastain's 153, Chase Elliott's 86, and then Larson's 51, which is insane. Like it was nuts. So that speaks to the chaos that can ensue, the amount of time that somebody can rebound. So please, if you're in our Discord and somebody gets penalized in the first 2 stages, don't freak out. It's such a long race that you could fall asleep, miss the middle 2 stages, and it'd be a completely inverted running order, and you'd have no idea how.
I mean, Nick Sanchez in last night's Truck Series race, I think he lost a lap because he had to pit under green flag conditions for a second time, I think in like the 2nd or early 3rd stage. Came back all the way and still grabbed the top 10. So it's like, that is my one pet peeve about casual NASCAR DFS players, is that, if their lineups are bad, like halfway through stage 1 or 2, they just assume the worst. I went to bed last night and I wasn't making any money on the truck race. I was losing about $10 because I only played the happy hour. But I woke up and I still I turned a profit. And granted, it was only $4, but like that's just how it turns in NASCAR. Like you can go from being great to finishing the race in awful conditions, or you can go from having a terrible night to a great night. That's just the state of NASCAR.
Yep. Now obviously it's different if your guys wreck out.
Yep. You can't recover from there.
That's unfixable, much like Sergio Perez putting his car in the wall in turn 1 in Monaco qualifying Saturday morning. But in terms of dominators, how are you building yours for? We just went over laps led in last year's race,
and I think that's a
top 50.
That's a good segue into this portion of the podcast, because I think you almost have to draw a narrative in your head about how this race will go. A lot of people are going to play William Byron just because he's on the pole, and we've seen Byron this year lead a ton of laps. I mean, he led 193 at Dover, collected fastest. He's collected double-digit fastest laps in each of the last 4 races. He led 117 laps at Richmond, 176 at Phoenix. Now, these are all different tracks from the intermediate package that we'll see on Sunday. but he still had just pure speed in the car, and so he's going to be an easy one to contend with. So you could, easily plug in a William Byron and think, okay, I want him to get at least 50 laps led in stage one. And then you can plug in a guy like a Kyle Larson or a Ross Chastain to maybe get those dominator points in the middle of the race. I think it's interesting that we were talking about last year's race and how Chastain had well over 100 laps led. Larson had over 50. Chase Elliott had 80. This is one of those races where there are enough laps led that there's not going to be a solo dominator in this car. Right. At intermediates, we just haven't seen a solo dominator like
we saw that car once when Truex went out and led 392 of 400 laps, but that's never happening again. That was literally the most miles led ever in the history of any auto sport that's not a 24-hour race, right? Mm-hmm. Not happening. So I'm with you that it's going to take multiple dominators. And by the way, just so we're on the same page here, Ross Chastain, you remember where he started last year's race?
Wasn't it like P22, something like that?
He started 22nd. He led 153 laps, had 60, or sorry, he led, 150 something laps, had 66 fastest laps, and finished 7th, right? The winner last year, Denny Hamlin, gets credited with winning from the pole, mind you. He led 15 laps.
That's insane.
So, he started on the pole. Mid-race, he was 5th. He finished 1st. He went all the way back to 25th at one point, probably during a pit cycle, right? His average running position last year was 7th. He had 2 fastest laps, 15 laps led, and won the race. And by the way, there were 13 overtime laps last year. They ran 413 laps. So a decent chunk of those happened in overtime as well. So, and not to dissuade you from playing Chase Briscoe, he did start 15th last year and finished 4th in this race.
Well, good for Chase Briscoe. My one concern.
Not saying that I'm playing Chase Briscoe. I'm just saying people will toss that out that he did run well here last year.
The one thing I worry about with Byron is that his car does tend to start the race very strong early on, but then it fades a little bit later in the race. We saw it at Dover. So do keep that in mind. He's not going to go out, and he probably won't just go out and dominate the whole race by himself and probably score well either way. But he is a candidate to lead the early dominator laps as well. Ross Chastain is going to be up there as well, as will Kyle Larson. Larson's just been so fast in almost every metric, no matter the track that we go to. Yep. It's just, you just hope that nothing bad happens to him. He's just run into some pretty bad luck with some of the races.
But at the same time, last year, literally everything bad that could have happened, and he still led 50-something laps.
Yeah.
So, and he did not have the speed as consistently last year as he does this year. So, we'll see. I apologize for any background noise you may hear. My kids are home and have decided to make a ruckus.
It's fine. I have fire trucks driving by my apartment right now.
So, I think we certainly need 2 dominators. I would not shy away from putting in 3 guys that could lead 50-something laps, because keep in mind that we will almost assuredly have a comp caution in the first stage as well, because they did not get practice or qualifying. That's regardless of if the race happens Sunday night or Monday. Almost assured we'll have a comp caution somewhere.
I think that benefits a guy like Denny Hamlin greatly.
I would agree. The guys go ahead.
Well, my concern is, especially if this race somehow gets moved to Monday and they're not running in the conditions like a cooler night race. Either way, I think that the Hendrick Chevys and the JGR Toyotas and pretty much all the Toyotas are going to show up with speed. I really don't see a problem with Denny Hamlin getting around Kevin Harvick and Brad Keselowski, who are starting P2 and P3 respectively.
Correct.
And if there is a comp caution and this race does reset after 20, 30, maybe 40 laps, I'd be surprised if it was that long, the comp caution that is, then I expect Denny Hamlin to probably restart on the front row with Byron and potentially get around him and win the first stage. And in which case, you probably can start some laps with, Hamlin Larson or Hamlin Chastain, and then hopefully you can find an 8K driver that can go out and lead some laps. Tyler Reddick is probably the most likely of that group because just he's another Toyota. But that's just my own personal thoughts on, building a narrative in your head about how a race can go and choosing your dominators that way.
Yeah, I would also say the comp caution probably helps a guy like Kyle Busch too,
Yep.
who's starting 5th. Comp cautions are really good for guys who are really good at telling their crew what they need in a car. If they can go out and get a 30 or 40 lap run on a track and then go back and say, if you ever listen to Kyle Busch's radio, it's amazing how well he dissects what his car is doing on the track. He will give it quarter, but like segmented breakdowns, like turn 1, it's this, turn 2, it's this, backstretch is this, turn 3, turn 4. And on a road course, it's even more insane. So if you give a guy like Joey Logano or Denny Hamlin or Kyle Busch the chance to go out there in race conditions and say,
And
my
make their
car
car
is
better.
doing this for 30 laps, which is a pretty decently long run in a race at this point. Let's go adjust it. And by the way, we can basically hold our spot because everybody's going to pit at that point.
Mm-hmm.
It benefits those guys for sure. And obviously, if you have trouble in the first 30 laps, that helps you too. Because, if you get a lap down early, that comp caution's your savior right off the bat.
So we have a few minutes left previewing the Coca-Cola 600. Real quick, I kind of just did want to pick your brain. Not necessarily, do I want your best or your sneakiest GPP or tournament plays, just because we will have the NASCAR DFS playbook available Saturday evening for this race. But who are some value plays that we can look at? Just because the way this field shook out with the lineup being set by the metric. We're getting some very interesting plays. We already touched on Alex Bowman starting pretty far back. Daniel Suarez is outside the top 20. We briefly touched on him and how Trackhouse should have speed. Are there any other value plays way at the bottom, maybe 6,500 and below, that we can feel pretty good about locking into a cash lineup, or just maybe a very good play that you're comfortable giving away right on a podcast for free?
So I think it'll be interesting to look at Todd Gilliland. You and I were talking briefly about him before the pod. Normally he's in the 38, right? Which we've grown to like him quite a lot. This week he's in the 51. I think people will see that and kind of back off because of the Rick Ware equipment. He's starting far enough back for me that I'm not sure it really matters, and I think people are going to avoid him because of the 51. Being in the 51 car. He's run pretty well, just about. I mean, Darlington, he ran pretty well just outside the top 10. Kansas, he had a pretty solid rate. I mean, not great, but he almost paid back 5X, right? Granted, those were all in, the 38 car, but that's a guy I'm pretty comfortable with.
Are you still okay playing him in the Rick Ware car, even though this is a 400 lap race? Because I have concerns that it just doesn't hold up. Now, they do have that affiliation with Stewart-Haas Racing, and you would think that Ryan Newman has decided to come back and run a few races in the Rick Ware car, because there's always that stigma that this car sucks. And if this was a 250 to 300 lap race, I could probably talk myself into it. I'm not as confident with this race being 400 laps.
I think it's all right, because the main thing with me is that they're basically all stock parts now.
Okay.
Right? All of the main, like, it's how you tweak it, obviously, but the engines are all supplied by basically the same people. The main parts of the car are all stock. That's why you can't mess with them or you get hammered by NASCAR with huge things. So if this was a previous iteration of a car, yeah, I'd be concerned. I'm less concerned now with it. I know a lot of people are going to be wanting to play Jimmy Johnson, just as he's Jimmy Johnson and he's been really good here. I'm not 100% sold on Legacy Motor Club being any good, no matter who the hell is in that car. So I don't know. People are going to play him. I'm not as high on him this week as I normally am.
All right. Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time. Let's hope that we can enjoy the Coca-Cola 600 Sunday night with very few weather concerns. I am not going to get my hopes up too much, but there's still a chance. But as always, thank you for your time and best of luck to you and the FA Nation.
Best of luck, FA.